Oh, good day everyone. Today I want to talk to you about 7 probity traps for young players that you may come across if you are undertaking some sort of Commonwealth procurement. So these are some of the things we have come across over the years, and they are in no particular order. So let's have a look at those. It's Simon Zarifa here from Shrewd. We provide commercial support to the Commonwealth to help the Commonwealth successfully deliver value for money projects. Righto. So those 7 probity traps, what are they? As I say, these are in no particular order. Number 1 is in your process documents, you want to make sure that you don't overuse the word must, because if you place a must, then guess what? You must do something. So the word must implies that there's an obligation to do something. And whilst there are definitely circumstances when you should definitely use the word must, you want to consider its use otherwise, because there are some things you may not want to be forced to do. You may want to leave yourself some discretion. So you might want to just look at, well, you should look, in fact, at every time you use the word must in your tender documents, and that includes in any statement of requirement or statement of work. Look at how often you use the word must, because when it comes to evaluating a statement of requirement or a statement of work, if a tenderer or vendor doesn't comply with a must, then they have to be excluded. That's the general rule. And in your tender process documents, like your evaluation plan, if you say that you must do something, then guess what? You must do it, when in fact maybe you want to allow yourself some discretion. For example, if you say you must create a shortlist when you're doing the evaluation, then guess what? You have to do it, when in fact you may want to retain some discretion to do that or not, depending on how many of your tenderers you want to or are progressing, because there might be a clear winner from your tender process, and so therefore what's the point in creating a shortlist? All right, so that is number 1. The second one we want to look at is that you want to make sure that when you're undertaking any sort of procurement, you want to make sure that your probity rules still allow for you to conduct what's called business as usual or normal interactions with the supplier. So let's just say you've got an incumbent supplier and they are providing some sort of services to your agency. You don't want the new procurement over here to impact on the ability to run business as usual operations with that vendor, even though that vendor is also responding to your tender, because otherwise it can make the actual day-to-day dealings with them over here quite difficult if they are also involved in the tender process over here. So most good procurement plans, and sorry, I should say that again because I got it wrong, most good probity plans will have a business as usual section which will specify how the agency or the department can interact on a business as usual basis with any incumbent suppliers. So that is something to definitely think about, and don't be overly prescriptive in the tender process, and don't make life too difficult for your agency in dealing with the day-to-day interactions with any incumbent suppliers. Let's move on. Number 3. So normally when you are running a tender, if a tenderer asks a question, usually you will sanitize that question so no one or none of the other tenderers know who asked the question, and then you circulate the answer to that question to all other tenderers. Now that is what happens, say 90-95% of the time, but there are certain circumstances when a tenderer will ask a question that it may not be appropriate to circulate with all other potential tenderers. And that could be for security reasons or privacy reasons or something like that. So whilst your evaluation plan should indicate that all tenderers will be given the same information, you don't want to back yourself into a corner to compel yourselves to always disclose questions asked by one tenderer to all other tenderers, because there may be circumstances, as I say, when you don't want to do that. So that's just another thing to think about, and don't fall into that trap. Okay, number 4. So one of the things I have seen is when people undertake, when the Commonwealth undertakes procurements for projects, often probity becomes bigger than it really needs to be. Now, obviously, probity is important, but sometimes it can be put way up there on high with the Prime Minister, if you know what I'm saying, and people then, don't want to use their own, or they don't want to take any risks because they just want to, ensure that they comply with probity obligations in every minute and, infinite way. And so what can often happen is the probity arrangements can become an impediment to the actual efficient operation of the procurement. Now, don't forget, there is an obligation under the CPRs for the Commonwealth to undertake procurements in an efficient and effective manner. And so whilst you've got to be mindful of probity obligations, don't back yourselves into a corner and make your procurement process inefficient and ineffective due to those probity requirements. So as an example, you shouldn't exclude a tenderer for not attaching their tenderer's declaration. You should just be able to go back to them and seek a correction. Also, you don't want to put in place probity arrangements that stop officials clarifying tenders where the clarification process could go a long way to assisting the officials in understanding what the actual supplier or tenderer is offering. And also, you don't want to put in place probity arrangements that mandate, as in compel you to undertake a certain way of rating or scoring responses using some predetermined mathematical formula, because that could give you an outcome that doesn't lead to what you want. Now, obviously, you need to act consistently and fairly when evaluating and scoring all tenderers, but this is more about when you set up the probity arrangements, make sure you're not backing yourself into a corner by forcing yourselves, to use a formula that will potentially skew the result. So that is something else to think about. Okay, now the next one here is the appointment and the sign-offs from an external probity expert do not, unfortunately, remove your agency's accountability. So your agency will always be on the hook for the probity obligations in the relevant procurement process that your agency is running. But in saying that, you are entitled to rely on the advice and expert assistance from external probity advisors. It's just that relying on that advice won't completely exclude you from any accountability. You still need to be satisfied that the process is above board from a probity perspective, and you can't just wash your hands of it and rely on the external probity advisor, even though they can go a long way to keeping you out of trouble in terms of any sort of probity issues that arise along the way. But also, where you do use external probity advisors, then agencies should carefully consider and test the merits of any rules proposed by that probity expert, where those rules insist on probity experts signing off on all responses and insist on probity experts attending all meetings where it could be appropriate for protocols to put in place to guide how an agency would interact with the tenderers. And so what you will often find here, and my brethren in the probity advice game may not like this, but c'est la vie, is that you don't want the probity advisor to basically, give themselves a blank check for work by imposing all of these processes that have to be complied with when really you don't need them. There are some things you'll definitely want an external probity advisor to sign off on, but they don't need to sign off on everything. And you don't really need them to always attend every single meeting when they could put in place a protocol which the agency should then be able to abide by. Okay, so just be judicious in your use of external probity advisors. That is the point I'm trying to make there. And the last trap for people in the procurement and the probity game is just to be mindful how you use your external probity expert. So officials should take care not to seek probity advice on legal advice and vice versa. You don't want to get legal advice on probity advice. You don't want an agency or an official in an agency to avoid making a decision when, to seek further advice when the course of action is clear. In other words, and I hate to say it, but you've just got to man up and make the decision because it's the right thing to do. And you don't want to allow any sort of weak advice from an external probity advisor to form the basis of a contentious decision unless that is avoidable. I just had to fix that because you shouldn't allow weak advice to form the basis of a contentious decision unless it's unavoidable. In other words, you should always ask your external probity advisor to give you robust and defensible probity advice, and then on that basis you should be able to make a decision. Okay, so what I've tried to capture, I should say, are 7 traps that can arise or have arisen during some of the Commonwealth procurements that we have undertaken. They are in no order, and there's obviously a lot more of them that could come to light. If you do have any questions, feel free to get in touch, simon@shrewd.com.au or 1-800-SHREWD, which is 1-800-747-393. A lot of these points also are found on the Department of Finance's website, and I'll provide that link to the relevant page in the description below. Thanks very much. Hope you found that useful.